Hello everyone and welcome to an incredible game that took place in an incredible match. It happened yesterday in round 5 of the FTX Crypto Cup. It is basically game 2 of the match, Jan-Krzysztof Duda versus Magnus Carlsen. This is the rapid portion, but as you guys know, the 4 games of rapid, well, we're going to discuss what happened in the match before we check out after we check out the game, because it's really a spectacular one. So here, and sorry about this, we just have to shift the players. Magnus lost the first game. We've seen that one. If you haven't seen it, do check it out. It's my previous video. Duda played a brilliant endgame and completely outplayed Magnus after Magnus made a tiny mistake, and it was enough for Duda to claim the whole game. And now this is the second game. Magnus has the white pieces, and he will of course try to retaliate, and he most certainly does try. So let's check it out. Magnus plays pawn to e4, we have e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. The Ruy Lopez is on the board, knight to f6, and now pawn to d3. We have bishop to c5, very modern way of challenging White's attempt at countering the Berlin defense, and now bishop captures on c6. We have d captures and knight b to d2. So this is all very standard. Of course, the e5 pawn cannot be captured because queen to d4 attacks the knight and threatens checkmate. So this is an in-between move, and now of course black has to do something about the e pawn. So knight to d7 defends the pawn. We always say that there are various ways that you can defend the pawn, such as moving the bishop, moving the knight, and so on. And now knight to f1 by Magnus. We have castles by Duda, and now Magnus goes pawn to g4. He lost the first game. Now he needs to bounce back, and he wants to start pushing those pawns and attack Duda's king side. And there is a game where bishop to b4 check was played. It was played in the game Nisipeanu versus Bindrich Falho from 2017. The game ended in a draw, but here we have rook to e8 by Duda, and it is now as of move 8 that we have a completely new game. So let's see how Magnus continues. We have knight to e3. The knight now has access to f5, so that could be very dangerous. And Duda says pawn to a5. He says, if this was good, everyone would play this. I'm not worried about your pawn pushing on the king side. I'm just going to play on the queen side, stop you from playing b4. So this is obviously good for me. So rook to g1. Magnus sticks to his plans, and now knight to f8. We have pawn to h4, and Duda, still not impressed, just plays pawn to a4. We have knight to f5 by Magnus, and now pawn to b5. Duda completely ignores him, plays on the queen side. We have bishop to g5 attacking the queen, and now pawn to f6. Chasing the bishop back, we have bishop back to d2, and now king to h8. So how do you continue here with Magnus? There are various ways that you can play this. You could play king to f1, as you are probably not castling this game. You could play a3, stop further expansion on the queen side. You could start with h5, but Magnus actually decided to play pawn to g5. And this is the move that Duda said when he saw it. He was incredibly impressed, not by how good it is, but how Magnus actually played it. So here Duda starts capturing. Bishop captures on f5. E captures on f5, and now pawn to e4. That's why we said that the king would be better placed on f1. Now, if the position opens up, could get very ugly. D captures on e4, rook captures on e4, king to f1, and now queen to d5 by Duda, preparing to bring the other rook into the game. We have g captures on f6, g captures, and bishop to c3. And it seems like Magnus is definitely onto something, controlling this diagonal, controlling the g file, with the rook offering a queen trade. If Duda trades, then Magnus gets the rook into the game, but Duda, of course, goes for queen captures on f5. It is the best move and the only way to push for the win with black. So here, rook g5. A very nice rook lift by Magnus. Of course, the rook cannot be captured. The pawn is pinned. But now queen to h3 with check. Again, the only way to play for the win, but to Duda spots it very quickly. King to g1, and now rook to g4 with check, eliminating one of Magnus's attackers. Rook captures on g4, queen captures on g4, and now king to h1 as the king is in check. And now knight to d7. A beautiful move. That prepares to bring the rook into the game, but also bishop to d6 will be a very nasty move for Magnus to handle. So here, knight to h2 attacks the queen, also offers a queen trade, and now just queen captures on h4, grabbing a pawn, but this game really isn't about counting pawns. Now bishop to d6, once this lands, it is just game over, and this even comes with sacrifice of a piece, but you know that once this knight is captured and bishop to d6 lands, you are not defending this position. So queen captures on d7 is the only move. You could also go for queen to g4, offer a queen trade, but after captures and captures, it's really not all that great. Magnus is down 2 pawns, and it's just a better position for black. So instead, after queen captures on h4, Magnus has to go for queen captures on d7, and now just bishop to d6. Absolutely beautifully played by Duda. King to g2. You have to start running away with your king. Queen captures on h2, king to f1, and now queen to h1 with check. We have king to e2, hoping that Duda captures the rook. Then we can play bishop captures and queen to g7 checkmate. But of course, Duda will not do that. So here, queen to e4 check, king to f1, and now queen to c4 with check. King to e1, we have rook to f8. Seems like a passive move, but it is necessary to defend this pawn. And now bishop defends rook, rook defends pawn. This pawn is defended by the bishop, bishop defends the pawn. Everything is defended. There is no way for Magnus to break through in this position, but he can finally get his rook into the game. Rook to d1, and it seems that if he can get king to d2, king c1 in there, he's back in the game. But Duda just plays queen to e4 with check. And now the sad reality is that if king to d2, bishop to f4 is checkmate. That's the problem for Magnus. So he has to go back with the king, or rather to the open board, king to f1, and now queen to h1 with check, king to e2, and here another beautiful move by Duda, just queen to h5 with check, and it was in this position on move 34 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. The queen here is absolutely beautifully placed. The point is that if the king moves away from the rook, you just capture the rook with check. If you remain on e1, we can just play rook to e8 with check. We can even show it, king to e1, rook to e8 with check, and now there really aren't any moves. For example, king d2, bishop to f4, another mating maneuver, king to d3, now queen to e2 with check, king d4, and queen to c4 will be a beautiful checkmate with the king in the center of the board. So after queen to h5 check, there are no moves, and of course it was in this position that Magnus resigned the game. If you try f3, yes, it's possible, but still rook to e8 again just ends the game. For example, king to f2, now we can even play queen to h2. With check, king to f1, queen to e2 with check, king to g1, now this wonderful bishop to h2 with check, king to h1, queen captures on f3 with check, sacrificing the bishop for checkmate, king captures, rook to e2 check, king to g1, and now queen to g1 will be checkmate. So beautiful stuff. Of course, Magnus sees all of this, and he was forced to resign the game here. So this is the second game of the Rapids. Duda won the first game brilliantly. He won the second game with the black pieces brilliantly. So is there any chance for Magnus Carlsen to bounce back? Well, believe it or not, Magnus actually won the next 2 Rapid games on demand, and he was able to force tie breaks, which which was just incredible. And he didn't go wild or anything. He just played completely calm chess. Waited for Duda's mistake. He pushed for a long end game, and in the end he outplayed Duda. He himself said that he played terribly, and well, it is definitely not something to be proud of, but Duda at some point played even worse than that, and then he was able to win. He was able to force tie breaks, and then Duda claimed the first win in the blitz tie breaks. And again, Magnus needed to win on demand to force Armageddon, and this is the position from the final blitz game. And it's really a beautiful one. Here Magnus played the d4, and I'm just going to show you what happened here because it's absolutely spectacular. Here Duda played pawn to e6, now threatening pawn captures on f7, which would win the game. So f6, chasing away the knight and inviting the knight to f7. Knight to f7 was played. Let me just switch this so you guys have a better idea of who's playing who. Duda has the white pieces here. So king to g7, and now queen to d2. Beautiful square for the queen, because now if Carlsen's queen ever moves, you can play pawn to f5 and go for this queen to h6 checkmate. So d3 by Magnus, attacking the rook, preparing c4 and c3, rook e to e1, and now pawn to c4. And now this c4 push came a bit too soon, but this is blitz, so of course Duda doesn't have all the time in the world make use of it, but he finds the absolute best continuation. Knight to d4 attacks the queen, which forces the queen from f5, which means you can push f5 and then go for this queen to h6 checkmate. So queen d5 by Magnus, pawn to f5, threatening queen h6 check, king g8, and queen to h8 checkmate. Now rook to h8. Magnus has to stop this and offer a rook, but Duda is not interested in grabbing the rook. He prefers to have a knight on f7, and who wouldn't? This is truly a monster knight. So queen to f4 by Duda, and now knight to c6 by Magnus. We have knight to b5, and now queen captures on f5. Magnus now offers a queen trade, goes for the endgame because he does have these two pawns. Duda happily accepts, queen captures, pawn captures, knight captures on h8. Now he says, all right, we are in the endgame, I will grab the material. Rook captures on h8, and now rook captures on f5 by Duda, and now Magnus goes rook to d8. Here, the incredible thing is that just d2 is winning for Magnus, but it's blitz, very little time on the clock. Point is that after rook to d1, the move that, well, Magnus obviously missed is bishop to b4. This wins the c3 square, and now c3 is coming. There's no stopping this. Whatever you play doesn't really matter. For example, g2, just c3, and if c2 lands, it's game over, so you're going to have to give up your knight, and now, of course, Magnus is up too much material. He will win this game easily. So after rook captures on f5, Magnus played rook to d8. First, he prepares the pushing of the d pawn, and now rook to b1 by Duda. And now d2 still completely winning. Magnus goes for king to g6 first, and now rook to f4. Now the position is, better for Magnus, but not very, very clear. Because here, if you push d2, then just knight to c3, and if bishop to b4, which worked in all of those previous moves lines, just pawn to e7. And now you don't have a move. If the rook moves away from the d file, you no longer control d1. Also, rook captures on c4 will defend the knight, so that's out of the question. You're just going to have to play bishop captures on e7, and then rook captures on c4 comes, and that's it. You can no longer push for advantage here. So instead, knight to e5 was played, but now Duda plays knight to c3. We have pawn to d2. Finally, Magnus plays it, but now it is not enough. Rook captures on b7, saying, okay, you promote this pawn to a queen, you're going to win my knight, but I'm going to win your bishop on e7. So here, rook to d3 by Magnus, going after the knight on c3. Now the beautiful knight to d1 by Duda. We have pawn to c3, and now rook to c7. Duda not allowing Magnus to push this pawn to c2. Bishop to b4, everything set up perfectly like in the lines that we've shown, only the difference is here the position is now completely lost for Magnus. Rook captures on b4. That's the problem. Yes, you've seen it correctly. Magnus played bishop to b4, and he completely blunders a bishop. Little time on the clock. The nerves were already at the edge, and it was only a matter of time before one of them messes up like this. Magnus was the one to mess up first, and of course now the position is completely winning for Duda. Knight to f3 check was played, king to h1, and it was in this position that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, and with it the match. Maybe a few more moves were played. Yeah, Magnus played knight to e1, then pawn to e7 by Duda, king to f7, and now rook to b8, I believe. Or maybe, no, let me just check. I don't want to trick you guys, but I'm pretty sure that the game ended with this king to h1 move. Yeah, the game ended with the move king to h1, but the reason it ended is that it's completely winning. For example, knight to e1, e7 now preparing the queening of the pawn, and now there's no defense against this. If king to f7, just rook b8, and now of course this will be just game over. c2, we're gonna play e8 queen, and this is now checkmate. So yeah, sorry about that. I forgot that it actually ended with the moving of the king on h1. But yeah, brilliant display by Duda. He could have taken the match much sooner, but Magnus was able to get to his head a little bit, but Duda once again shows why he is known or referred to as the Magnus Kryptonite, as he has a tendency of ruining Carlsen's winning streaks. And also, yeah, here are the standings after day 5. Magnus is still leading with 13 points as Prague lost to Quang Liem Le. after 3 games, but Magnus made it to tiebreak, so he gains 1 extra point for actually reaching the tiebreak. So Magnus is now the clear leader after day 5. Alireza catching up to them with 11 points. He completely demolished Hans Smoke and Niemann. Anish Giri with 7, Liem with 6, Duda with 6, and Levon Aronian, who lost to Anish Giri with 5 points. So that's the game, or those were the games, those were the standings. Hope you guys enjoyed that. I would like to thank Raymond Rafael, Buntiak Pang, Amar Ashur, Michal Sakarias, and Charles Bartholomew for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FTX Crypto Cup until it finishes. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.